think Heather is going to join us after her board meeting at Norbar. She's on the board of directors there. Anyone have any transactional questions they've got on their minds this morning? Okay, then let me start with what I've got. So we came up with, we have a listing, we're representing the seller. The seller had I don't know if it was a leak in the bathroom or something that had happened, and the leak had been fixed, but the tile where the tile was undermined in a certain area and needed to be replaced. And she didn't want to do it herself because she thought the buyer might want to do their own tiling. So she indicated she'd give a credit for that. And so it was $10,000. So the deal was worked out. A buyer came in. We actually got 5 offers. Our agent got 5 offers on the property, which was nice to see in kind of an otherwise slowing market. There are still properties that are having good buyer demand. So it was written up, as we always write those credits up, as a credit for closing costs. And the buyer was coming in from the sale of another property that she owned in Arizona, and had a substantial down payment in excess of 50%. And so her loan was relatively low, and in the 400 range. And so the our agent was asking, might she, the $10,000 exceed the amount that she's able to deduct according to the lender? Because the lenders have restrictions on how much credit that buyer can take as closing costs. And if the amount exceeds the amount the sellers agreed to credit, exceeds the amount the lender would accept, that money goes back to the seller. So we didn't want that to happen, because this really wasn't for closing costs. It was for this tile thing. So this was brought up by our agent, the listing agent. And I said, well, the contract deals with this. The RPA deals with this. So we're looking at the RPA here, and we're looking at paragraph 5. And we're looking at paragraph 5E. And it deals with limits on credits to the buyer. And it's any credit and the buyer specified in paragraph 3GI, and that's in the grid. So let's just go back to the grid and see where this would be. 3G1. So in here it said seller credit, if any, to the buyer, and it would put in $10,000 there. And then the default is the seller credit to be applied to closing costs. So that's how that paragraph read in the grid. So then it refers to paragraph 5E. And from any credit from any source for closing or other costs that is agreed to by the parties shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender and made at close of escrow. If the total credit allowed by the buyer's lender, defined as the lender's allowable credit, is less than the contractual credit, then 1, the contractual credit from the seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable credit. That means they keep the money. And 2, in the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there shall be no automatic adjustment of the purchase price to make up the difference between the contractual credit and the lender allowable credit. So with the parties could agree that they're okay, you can only use $8,000 of that credit, will reduce the purchase price by $2,000, and kind of that's your $10,000. But if they don't agree, then the seller gets that $2,000 back. if let's say the $8,000 was the maximum the lender would allow. So anyway, we weren't sure of this because it's a buyer's loan. It's not our loan. So our agent said, well, should I point this out to the buyer's agent, the selling agent? And I said, well, we have no real obligation to point it out. It's right here in the contract. But it certainly can't hurt to communicate with them and just say, oh, we want you to be sure that, so you get the buyer gets the full $10,000 credit. The paragraph 5E is checked out with the buyer's lender. It's just a courtesy. It wasn't a requirement, but it was just a courtesy. So we did that, and it turned out that the buyer could take all $10,000 as credit on their loan, and everything was cool that way. So another option would have been that the buyer could have brought down their interest rate a little bit to increase their closing costs. So they pay a point to reduce their interest rate, and that would have taken up some of that $10,000 if it was otherwise maxed out. So any questions on that? Okay. Next on my list is AVIDs. We cover AVIDs relatively frequently. And I want to go through the exercise here of logging into broker risk management. All right. Now, if you check in the chat, I put in the chat brokerriskmanagement.com. That's the website. BHGWCG is the logon, and Bonita, BONITA, is the password. So let's just go there, and we'll check out this, and let's see, Safari. Are you seeing my Safari screen? Anybody? No. Okay. So I got to share that again. Hold on a second. All right. I'm going to share the screen. All right. So here's my Safari screen. I use this web browser called DuckDuckGo because I like the logo. Also, it's a very secure one, and it's free. So we go over here, and I'm going to log into brokerriskmanagement.com. So this is their landing page. And then over here, these small buttons is the client logon. And because I log on to this frequently, it has an autofill for me, which is convenient. So there's the BHGWCG as the username. And then that spells, though you can't see it, that's BONITA, capital B, Bonita. So we log into this, and then we have the weekly practice tips that I send around weekly. So if you recall, if you, let's say you're in a situation, you recall, oh, I remember there was a practice tip on that. You come in here and you can put in the search by topic, the topic you're looking for. So I'm looking for AVIDs. So I put in AVID and I press go, and it pulls up, should pull up. There it goes. Different AVID tips. And this is the one I was looking for, handling the agent visual inspection to close disclosure the right way. So I click on that, and up it pops. The one fault with this program is I can't print from this screen. So if I want a copy of this at this point, I have to And I can't figure it, it doesn't have a download button or anything like that. So I just copy it all and print it put it in a Word file, and then I can print it. But anyway, so this is these are the things I want to highlight in this practice tip. So this bold language here is: conduct a reasonable, competent, and diligent visual inspection. So that's number one. We are obligated to conduct a reasonable, competent, and diligent visual inspection. That's number one. So we got to walk through the house and around the house and make a visual inspection of everything. And as we're doing that, we're obligated to, number two, disclose to the prospective purchaser all facts materially affecting the value or desirability of the property. Now, I would add in here defects, material facts, all facts. And I really, instead of the word facts, you could put in defects, material defects affecting the value or desirability of the property. We don't want to put in facts there that are like positive facts, like, newly remodeled kitchen. That's a positive fact, and it affects the value and desirability of the property, but it's not what we're looking for in an AVID. What we're looking for in an AVID is defects that we might see. We're walking through hundreds and hundreds of homes each year that the buyer may not see when they've only walked through a couple. So that's why, that's where we're obligated. And down here in this paragraph here, it says that the AVID's not a legal form. It's not required by statute, but it has become the standard of care to use between the principals and the agents. So a standard of care is a court matter, that a standard that the court would use to say, did we perform our job to the standard of care of a reasonable agent in the business? So the standard of care for would include us doing an AVID at this point. So if we have to go in court and we don't have an AVID in our file, whether we're representing a buyer or a seller, we're going to have problems. And there's certain things we aren't obligated to investigate. We aren't obligated to climb onto the roof or go under the house in the crawl space. We aren't obligated to look behind furniture or under carpets, things like that. But this bold paragraph here says, but as always, if we know anything about the property or even have knowledge about matters we're not obligated to inspect, that means we were told by somebody, or we see in the reports, that there was dry rot in the sub area, then we must still disclose what we know. So it may not be an area we're obligated to inspect, but we're still obligated to disclose if we have knowledge of something.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can we just write on there, please see pest report provided to client or, buyer or seller,
Yeah.
instead of line item everything in the report?
Yeah, we can. I mean, the CDS should refer the buyer to reports, but we can also reference them in our at the end of our AVID under other. Please see reports dated such and such, performed by so and so. So be sure to identify it with some specificity if you're going to refer to it. Then the best practices section of this, I do like these reports or these weekly practice tips, because they usually end with a paragraph on best practices. And to fully meet our duty to inspect and disclose, we use the AVID form, whether or not the seller is required to do a TDS. So we may have an exempt seller, but we still need to do our AVID. So we may be dealing with a foreclosure property where the bank doesn't need to do a TDS, or we may have an estate where the trustee is exempt from doing a TDS. We still do our AVID, always use an AVID. Establish a routine for conducting your inspections. I've talked in the past about when I was doing commercial real estate, I was studying to get a CCIM designation. They taught us to start at the top of the property. So we had a 7-story building. So always start on the roof and work your way down. Just walk down floor to floor as you go through and inspect things. So have a method to your madness. Always start in the living room or always start in the kitchen, whatever it is. Just that way, if you're in court and they say, well, how do you perform your visual inspection? You say, well, my practice is to always start in the kitchen and then go to the dining room, then and lastly, I finish up in the bedrooms, whatever it is, have a routine so you can say, I do it the same way every time. Complete the AVID as you do your inspection. You've probably all been in homes where a home inspector is doing his inspection, or maybe even a pest control person, and as they're in a room noting something, they're putting it down in their computer. And later it goes into the report. So they're doing it on the fly as they're doing their inspection. So, don't walk through and say, okay, now I'll go back to the office and do my, fill out my AVID. You aren't going to remember everything. So take notes as you walk through, and for every line on the AVID, you want to write something. You want to demonstrate in a later claim that you did your statutory duty to inspect. Don't write stock phrases like nothing to report. I agree with the seller. They don't prove you were actually in the property. There are some recommendations down here at the bottom. It says you can use the phrase, let's see, what does it say here? Oh, we'll get to it a little later, but there are some stock phrases you can put in there, but not those type of stock phrases. Yeah, here it is. If there is no noticeable defect in the room, you simply write no visual material defects. Or you can leave that section blank, but it's better to write no visual material defects. Oh, and I skipped over E, which is important. It says, don't use adjectives or superlatives. House looks great. Home was beautifully remodeled. I was reviewing an agent's AVID the other day. It was her first AVID she'd ever done. And she said in there, there's a newly remodeled kitchen and appliances. I said, well, no, that doesn't matter. Take that out. The AVID is not a marketing flyer. So we're look for defects that the buyer might not ordinarily see. Don't characterize any defect you see or assign responsibility for the condition, or make suggestions about remedial action. Just note that what you see. It says, for example, if there's, don't say water stain, simply, you don't know it was caused by water, just a stain. And you can't obligate the seller to do anything. This isn't a contractual document. So this is, you can't use a phrase like stains will be removed by seller following simple cleaning. Or that, oh, that stain will be cleaned up with a little bleach and water. You don't make suggestions like that. Just state, stain noted on ceiling. But that's all we're obligated. That's the best way to handle that. Let's see. Oh, my favorite one about that is the agent went in the room and I was reading his AVID, and again, this is like the first AVID the agent had done. And it says dining room light switch not working. And I said, well, how do you know the light switch is not working? He says, well, when you go and turn on the switch, the light doesn't go on. I said, well, maybe the light bulb's out. Maybe something else is wrong. And why are you fiddling around with light switches anyway? We don't deal with light switches. So we aren't obligated to go and try all the plugs or try all the light switches or anything like that. So we shouldn't be. And if we did note for some reason that we tried a light switch just because the room was dark and the light didn't come on, you might just note wasn't able to light the room, add light in the room. Use your phone, put on the flashlight, you don't really have to report that. Now, this is where this came up this week, disclosing unverified information. So this often happens. The neighbor comes over and says, did you know they were just selling drugs out of that house? Or, are you aware that did the seller tell you the fence is it's not on the property line? So now you have this thing that the neighbors told you. Do you know it's true? No, it's just what the neighbor told you. So we have to do the old disclose, attribute, and disclaim. The old DAD acronym: disclose, attribute, and disclaim. So this is what you would write. On December 27th, 2022, while I was in the property, the neighbor at blank, 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 next door, at their address, stated to me that the people in the home had blank, 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 were dealing drugs. Neither seller nor listing agent have investigated the truth or fallacy of that statement. If this is a matter of concern of the buyers, we are urged to investigate and satisfy themselves with respect to this matter. So what happened in our case this week was this was a new home, the rebuild after the fires on the fire lot. Apparently, as the builder was building the house, there was a little excavation on one side of the house. It was built on a hillside, and there was a little sloughing of the ground that involved the neighbors. It was across the property line. Actually, I looked at it yesterday, and it wasn't hardly worth looking at. And when the property got its permits for occupancy from the county didn't make any note of it. But the neighbor brought it up with our agent, said, hey, that there was slippage on my property when that house was under construction, and it needs to be addressed. So we put in there language like this. When I was at the property, the neighbor at the property next door put in the address, stated that there was sloughage of the soil on the property at the property line. And then you say neither seller nor listing agent have investigated, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So when you get that kind of third party comment made, again, remember, disclose, attribute, and disclaim. I like this DAD: disclose first, attribute it to somebody, and disclaim. Okay. And finally, if there's any information that's not really covered in the AVID form, here it suggests maybe there's a pending development project in the area, which could negatively affect the value or desirability of the property. We have the Sonoma Developmental Center being developed, over the next probably 20 years in Glen Ellen area. And if I had a home in that neighborhood, and I was listing agent, I said, there are plans being discussed to redevelop the Sonoma Developmental Center. They are available for the buyer to inspect through the proper channels, whatever. But I would make some mention of that because there's going to be a lot of going on in that area. I mean, that's 1,000 acres of land up there. And then there's the catch-all items that you can put into an AVID to assure that the buyer is getting all the information. So that's a long story short on AVID. And the main thing was to show you how you can go into that practice tip and it'll walk you right through that particular topic. And I have another one actually that came up this week. And let me go back here. What's that? Oops. Back into. Let's see. Were there any questions on that previous one? Yeah, Kendra says the AVID walks through. How about nothing noted? No, you'll see in that practice tip, it says nothing noted. It's not a very good answer. I think they use the language, no material defects noted or something like that. Let me see who it was. No visual material defects noted. So not just nothing noted, but say visual defects. It would be better to state that. Okay, what am I trying to get to here? Let's see. Hold on 1 second. There we are. Okay. So we're back at this home screen and I'm going to log in again. And the other thing that came up this week was our buyer we represented moved into the house, and the seller, according to the R, the request for repair that was agreed to, the seller was making repairs to certain items, and then the buyer closed on the home. They got copies of the receipts and things from the seller for having done the work. They never really did another reinspection, but they took at face value that the work was done because they had the receipts and so forth. But then after living in there for a month, the plumbing backed up and there was a problem with and it was one of the repairs that the contractor was supposed to have done, and it was just not done sufficiently. It wasn't done well, and it was still a problem. So now they have a claim against the seller of what to do. So I go to broker risk management again, and I look up buyer claims after close of escrow. So I put in buyer claims, and here it is, buyer claims after close of escrow. So this tip just walks me through what the buyer's options are after close of escrow. And we can act as communicators in this case. And we can reference this tip. We aren't supposed to share these tips per se, print them out and give them to the seller or the buyer, the client, but we can reference them. And we would say, you should go get estimates on what it will take to repair. And then I'm happy to send them to the listing agent. And then the listing agent will convey them to the buyer and to the seller. And we'll see if the seller will agree to make those repairs or give you a credit, for that. So that's kind of the short of it. If the seller doesn't agree, options then become going to small claims court if it's under $10,000 or going to mediation if it's a bigger amount. In this case, unfortunately, they didn't call us. The buyer didn't call us at the time they discovered this defect. They immediately called someone in and had it repaired. So, and then we're demanding $4,000 for the amount of the repair, which also included some upgrades to the bathroom. So the seller didn't have the ability, wasn't given the ability to get their own contractor to go back there and fix it, who they paid for, or compare the bids of what the buyer's contractor was doing versus the seller's, or anything like that. So it was like a fait accompli. And the seller says, well, I can't agree to that amount. I don't think I already paid the contractor once for that. He needs to go in there and he could have fixed it. So we're still kind of in a squabble about, whether the seller is going to agree to any credit there. But I'm happy, obviously you get a buyer claim after close of escrow, bring it up with us right away, because if it's a substantial claim, and particularly if it involves us, if we have one, I think I mentioned last week, we have a case now where the buyer thinks our agent was not doing the right thing during the course of the transaction. They wanted money from us for things that weren't disclosed. They felt it was our responsibility. We get that kind of claim and we have to file it with our E&O insurance right away as soon as we hear about it. Claims between buyer and sellers are claims between buyers and sellers. They aren't our responsibility to fix or investigate or find contractors for, or anything like that. We can just help with communication at that point. So I hope that's clear. There's also a form in there. What does the seller do in the broker risk management about what does the seller do when they get a claim after close of escrow? So if you get either case, you can go to broker risk management and look that up. Okay, any questions in that area? Okay, I hope you don't have any disputes in your transactions. Finally, and I guess Heather's going to be tied up today, so we won't get to the tech side, but next week, she's going to spend a good amount of time on the digital signatures in zip forms. So when you're preparing your forms in zip forms, you can send them out for signature directly after you've prepared them in zip forms without having to go to the third-party signature platform. So that's a helpful thing that we pay for through our CAR dues, and we should all know how to use that. Last thing was, I mentioned before, letters of intent. Particularly in commercial transactions, things don't start with necessarily.
Gary?
Yes, Joe.
One question before you move on. So
Yeah.
Not using a third-party transaction, do you mean like DocuSign?
Right. The e-signature platform that's built into zip forms can be used directly because we're already paying for it.
I had no idea we had it, so that'll be interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, she's going to cover that in detail next week. That'll save us from having to have the expense of having two platforms because we're already paying for one. So letters of intent. In commercial transactions, it's very common that the buyers start by sending the seller a letter of intent, which outlines what we call on the commercial side of the business terms. So it's not quite the grid that we see in the RPA now, but it has the salient facts spelled out in a letter. That's not a contract, it's a letter of intent. And the reason that's done is because in the nature of commercial transactions, often the parties may want to get their attorneys to draft contracts that are not standard contracts like we use in the residential business. So we had a client approach one of our buyers or one of our agents this week and said, I'm interested perhaps in buying this commercial property. Can you help with that? I'll pay, X dollars for it. And our agent contacted the owner, found out the owner in what's our tax form that's in the MLS. Anyway, no, that's not realist. Anyway, they found the owner and sent them a letter, and the letter, they responded and said, yeah, I'd entertain an offer. So rather than write up a contract right away, we wrote up a letter of intent. Now I've got a library of letters of intent that can be used for different purposes, to lease, to purchase a business, to purchase property. So if you're in a situation where, you aren't ready to go to contract, and you think a letter of intent would work, give me a call and we can see if that's the appropriate way to go. Because it's a good way to get the business terms set out and negotiate around them before and get them settled, get all the business terms settled before you actually put it into a contract. And if you're dealing in a property that you're unfamiliar with, commercial property, say you've never done a commercial transaction, we're licensed to do that, but we would encourage you to work with an experienced commercial agent. We have several in our offices. David Hughes up in Lake County, very experienced. Isaac Roboy, Misty Platt down here in Sonoma and Santa Rosa. And just, they'll work with you and you could share the transaction, learn a little bit about that business, and we'll be better protected. We'll all be better protected than trying to wing it without any kind of assistance. And of course, I can help you too. Okay.
Gary, is that done with a percentage in mind when you have somebody helping you on a commercial deal like that? Is there a set percentage?
No, a commercial referral. I mean, if I were referring a client out to Isaac, said, Isaac, handle this client, I want a referral fee, it would typically be 25 or 30% like it would be in the residential business.
Okay, thank you.
But if I'm going to work with them, because, I want to stay in touch with this client, they're a good, a client of mine's bought other property from me, residential property. Now they want to buy this commercial one. So I want to stick in the deal. You might do it on a 50-50 basis or something like that. All right. So that's all I have this week, unless anyone's got any other questions. Okay. Thanks.
No questions here. I'm sorry, I turned my camera off because I'm in the middle of making lunch for these kids. So I didn't want to be rude, but I'm like, I better turn it off. Okay. Anyhow, have a good weekend.
All right, everybody have a great weekend, and tune in next week for that tech tip that Heather's going to cover.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Okay, take care. Ciao.